Hello YouTube. Welcome once again to a quick video. This is going to be a very short video, and what we are going to be looking at today is actually examining a fundamental question. If you're watching this video, I'm sure you've asked yourself this question also. It's one of those questions which, in my opinion, is it's quite philosophical, and depending on whom you ask, you will have different responses. So here's the question: is a ROXOR a Jeep, a copy of a Jeep, a clone of a Jeep, or is the Mahindra ROXOR a vehicle on its own, to be respected and described on equal terms, just as a Jeep is a vehicle on its own and is described and respected and loved for what it is? Well, to attempt to answer this question, and I won't force you to agree with me, you can disagree with me, but to answer this question, we have to go back in time, examine the history of the Jeep to be able to come up to any kind of conclusion. So without further ado, let's go and look at the history of the Jeep. Of course, the Jeep CJ or Wrangler today as we know them. Well, the US Army had a contract that they put up for bid towards, I believe, the beginning of the Second World War, or slightly before that, to get a light reconnaissance vehicle. And you had three companies that submitted bids for that contract. One of them was retained. They used a very short period of time, and they came up with a prototype, which was selected by the US Army. So that vehicle went into production. Ultimately, it ended up with a vehicle that looks somewhat like this, roughly. And after a while, it was also manufactured for the civilian market. Now, the initial license holder for producing these vehicles, these Jeeps, we'll go through chronologically, from 1944 to 1953, was a company called Willys-Overland. So Willys-Overland had the license to produce these vehicles from 1944 to 1953. And then from that period, a company called, I believe it's called Kaiser Motors, was the one producing the Jeep. But Kaiser Motors actually did business as Willys Motors. That's how they were called, but it was actually Kaiser Jeep. That's the proper name, Kaiser Jeep. So from 1953 to 1964, I believe, that's the company that was producing the Jeeps, Willys Motors. Let's call it that way. No longer Willys-Overland, but it was actually a company called Kaiser Jeep. Then from 1964 to 1970, that same company actually called itself what it was, which is Kaiser Jeep, and they produced these vehicles. Now, that's when I say produce, I actually mean they were the license holders. They had the license to produce these vehicles. Now, from 1970 to 1987, another company called American Motors Corporation, AMC, acquired the license to produce these vehicles. I believe it was like $70 million that they paid for it. Kaiser Jeep paid about $50 million in the 1950s. So American Motors Corporation, AMC, acquired the license from 1970, and they held it until 1987. So in 1987, Chrysler came in and bought out the license to manufacture the Jeep from AMC. Meanwhile, AMC had already had a different division called AMG, American General Motors, I believe it was called. That went on to produce specifically heavy-duty vehicles for the military, and they would end up producing the Hummer that we know that the U.S. Army uses to this day. Now, from 1987 until I believe 2007, I believe 2007, Chrysler had the license to produce the Jeep. They had the license, and then just to remind you, in 1986, a French company called Renault actually controlled production, even though the license was owned by American Motors Corporation. Renault acquired shares in that company, and they controlled production for 1 year in 1986. And 1987, it was sold to Chrysler. So Chrysler had from 1987 and I believe up to 2009 that they had the license to produce to the Jeep trademark. So from 2009, I believe, to 2007 to 2009, DaimlerChrysler controlled the production. So 2007 to 2009, DaimlerChrysler got into the deal, and then from then onwards, it went up to about 2013, with ownership changing between DaimlerChrysler and then Chrysler, and then after that, in 2013, that's when you had, or 2014, that's when you had Fiat come into the picture. They acquired the license by merging with Chrysler to form the Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, which to this day holds the license to the Jeep name. Anyways, point I'm trying to make is the license went through many hands, and just between 2009 to 2014, it changed hand about 3 times, or the companies changed name about 3 times. Between Chrysler, Daimler, and then also Fiat. So Fiat is the current license holder. Now, that's on the part that happened here in the United States. There's another twist to the story, which is in India, in 1945, a company was founded, and that company was called Mahindra and Mohammed, M&M. So Mohammed was actually called Malik Ghulam Mohammed, and he was an accountant by training. He joined the company, he formed the company, founded the company with Mahindra, and Mahindra was actually 2 brothers, JC and KC Mahindra. So they founded the company in 1945, and then in 1947, India gained independence. Pakistan broke away from India, and Mohammed opted to acquire Pakistani citizenship. He became the first Minister of Finance in Pakistan. So in 1947, he left the company. He was Minister of Finance, and then later on he became, from I believe 1951 to 55, he was the 3rd Governor General of Pakistan. He left the position because of his ill health, and he died in 1956. So from 1947, Mahindra and Mohammed became Mahindra and Mahindra. So JC Mahindra was actually Jagdish Chandra Mahindra, And he was the eldest of 9 children. He helped educate his brother Casey all the way to Cambridge, but unfortunately he died in 1951 of a heart attack. The other Mahindra brother, Casey, Kailesh, Chandra Mahindra, who helped co-found the Mohammed and the Mahindra and Mohammed Steel Company in 1945, lived until I believe 1964. And yeah, so they are the ones who founded this company, Mahindra and Mohammed Steel Company in India. And from about 1947, they began by assembling Jeeps from complete knockdown kits, CKD kits in India. And later on, they acquired the license to produce the iconic Jeep in India. So what I'm trying to get at is you had the bifurcation of the Jeep story. One part outside of the United States, the other part occurred here in the United States through ownership of, through the hands of many different companies and corporations till this date. Whereas outside the United States, the Jeep was produced under license in many different countries. It was produced in India, of course. It was produced, I believe, in China, in Japan. It was produced. So you had many different countries. Even in France, they assembled Jeeps under different names. The fundamental thing that separated them was the Willys-Overland. Ford actually designed the 7-slotted grille, and it was adopted by Willys-Overland. And in later years, when Ford was producing their version of the Jeep, they used horizontal slots on the grille. So basically, yeah, a Jeep is a Jeep and a ROXOR is a ROXOR. They are what they are. And as an example, I was actually gonna take off my Mahindra sticker right here. You can see where I started taking it off, and something struck me and I stopped midway. So I never ever continued with the process because it has its own basic identity. It's a ROXOR from Mahindra, which is different from a Jeep. A ROXOR is a ROXOR, a Jeep is a Jeep. Same thing like the guys back in the 80s who would take, or the 90s, who would take a Pontiac Fiero, for those of you who can remember, which was a mid-engined 2-door, 2-seater car, and then they will put on the body panels like of a Ferrari or some other exotic sports car, a Lamborghini, and then drive around town, and people might think it's a Ferrari. No, it's not a Ferrari. If it's a Pontiac Fiero, be proud of it. If it's a Toyota MR2, be proud of it for what it is. So that concludes this video, and hopefully you can make your opinion of whether a ROXOR is a Jeep, a copy of a Jeep, an imitation of a Jeep, or whatever version you think it is of a Jeep. For me, it's just a ROXOR from Mahindra, 4-wheel drive, diesel engine, stick shift, something that I've been wanting all my life, and here it is. Thanks for watching. If I made any mistakes on the video, I'm sure my chronology from 1987 for the Jeep ownership might be a bit mixed up. Go ahead, write a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.